So I'm going to attempt to do some artwork. And um, I love to draw. And a fact is, I'm just not real good at it. And that's okay. Um, but I'm going to try or attempt to create a picture for you as I explain my understanding of what happens to our brain during numbing, medicating, or addiction, as so our culture refers to it. And the visual really helps me, and clients have told me that when they're in it, they think of Amber's picture. So apparently it's influential enough that it is supportive as a tool. So I'm going to do a couple of things with this. I'm going to talk about stress response. I'm also going to talk about what our culture calls addiction. And I would love, Amanda, if you're willing to mention or step into anything I missed that you think might be helpful. The beautiful thing about this video is there's no quiz. And you don't have to remember the words because you can just always refer back to this video or know the theme of what's happening. So for the purpose of this video, we're going to look at two parts of the brain. The first one is, hold on, let me finish there we go. Why they always turn out like a mushroom, I don't know. It just is. Maybe it's my obsession with congruence and symmetry. I don't know. Anyway, it's supposed to be a profile shot. It's supposed to be this. And there's a part of our brain that's right here behind our forehead. And this part of our brain is called the prefrontal cortex. That's a very medical-y term. And what it's responsible for is the important part. It's responsible for analyzing, decision-making, and most importantly, logic. It's also the part of the brain that does not finish, that's not the right word, does not completely develop until between 23 and 25, I think. Used to be 21, and some other research says now it can be as late as 25. So it's right here behind our forehead. It's called the prefrontal cortex. Go ahead, Amanda.
Another interesting thing I recently read is if you have any type of neurodivergence, it's estimated that it's not done developing until you're about 30.
Holy cow.
Yeah.
That's big. It's really big when you look at what it's responsible for. Analyzing, decision-making, and logic. There's so many times my husband is in his amygdala, which is what I'm about to show you, and me too. And he's trying to use logic with our 5-year-old. Logic doesn't work with the 5-year-old. It's not even developed yet. Little bit older, you can try it in parenting. And I do it too. That was not a dig at him. So the next part of our brain that I want to talk about is the amygdala. I was not a spelling bee champ, so please don't judge my spelling. The amygdala is actually back here in our brain and in the posterior area, I guess I would say. And the purpose of the amygdala is the 4 F's: fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. These are the two parts of the brain that I want to talk about today. There's no quiz. You don't have to remember all of this. The theme of it is what I want you to take away. So when we are raised in a state of chaos, inconsistency, unpredictability, whether that includes overt things like physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, or neglect, when there is unpredictability and inconsistency, because we're humans and creatures of habit, frequently we can fall into a state of survival. And the longer our body is in that state of survival, the more familiar it becomes. So, living in a state of fight, flight, freeze, or fawn is more common than maybe most people think, especially when it is a part of our story from childhood. Sometimes, as a child, when we are in a powerless state and we are parented or in an environment where it's not predictable, it's not consistent, it's not emotionally available, we learn how to survive that. Flight, fight, freeze, and fawn. I try to combine all of those sometimes. Um, becomes a way that we survive. Dissociation becomes a defense mechanism that allows us to survive. And our body learns how to use those tools longitudinally, meaning almost like a daily coping skill or a daily coping tool. The problem with that is that's not what they're meant for. The amygdala or the lizard brain is literally meant to keep us alive. It is the part of our brain that if we fall into the lion exhibit at the zoo, it gives us the strength to climb back out of the lion exhibit. Like it's the part of our brain that keeps me alive in circumstances that I'm probably or may not survive. So now I want you to think about, if I've learned about the amygdala, I've learned about stress response, fight, flight, freeze, fawn, and I'm learning that this is where I'm going in survival mode in my relationships. What does that mean to you? What does it mean to you if you're noticing you're going into a stress response in a conflict with your spouse? Is that scary? That the part of your brain that would keep you alive with a lion is the part of your brain that's coming on in a conflict with your partner, or with your family of origin, or with your friend, or maybe even with your kids, whether they're adult or little? What's happening for you that that part of your brain is what's coming on? Well, what our brain gets used to is familiarity. And the more time we spend in survival mode, the more time our brain believes that that is what's familiar, that that is where we're supposed to be. And what makes something trauma is that there was no repair. So it becomes a part of who I am. There's other neuroscience that explains the effects, the biological effects of trauma. One of those being it shrinks gray matter. That's a whole separate video, but it really does help to tie into some of these behaviors that we exhibit. So the first thing I want to say is I want to really validate where your relationship with your amygdala started. And if that's been decades long, changing that might take a little while. Another thing I want to highlight is the prefrontal cortex. That number one, it wasn't even fully developed until I'm 25, or if I'm neurospicy, until I'm 30. And also wondering if my parents even had an active prefrontal cortex, or if they lived in survival mode. I know mine did. And again, you don't have to come from a Jerry Springer family for this to be your story. Our culture really minimizes what trauma is. Trauma is about an experience. It is not about an event. So just because in our culture, it doesn't qualify for one of these check boxes of really scary things, that doesn't mean it's not trauma for you. It's an individualized experience. So when we look at the prefrontal cortex, it's over analyzing, decision making, and logic. Notice what's coming up for you when you think about your conflicts. Do you show up really logical? Do you show up already having a solution and recommending a decision? Or do you show up in a way where you can analyze what the other person is recommending as a solution? Not usually. Usually, in my experience, I'll speak in the I. We had 15 freaking fights about laundry. Or we had the same fight about the dishwasher 10 times. And what I know from a clinician experience is that's usually what brings us into therapy. Is we reach this point where there's no solution, there's no movement that's happening, and we're having the same fight over and over again, expecting a different result. So that's why I want to explain this neuroscience, because it is the explanation as to why we keep having the same fight over and over again, because the part of my brain that I need to be on is off. How do I know that? I know that because the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex cannot be on at the same time. When one is on, the other is off. Let me say that again because it's really important. This is why I have 15 fights about laundry. Because when the amygdala comes on, fight, flight, freeze, fawn, the prefrontal cortex goes off. There's no movement, there's no solution. Has my husband ever hit me? Are we in a volatile marriage? No. But my body has an association with conflict that is unpredictable and inconsistent. It tells me that anytime my radar is going off, that I need to win something or I need to survive something, my amygdala pops on, even when it's not needed. I asked a question a moment ago. Does it scare you? Do you notice that the part of your brain that keeps you alive with the lion is the part of your brain that's coming on when you're arguing about the laundry? Wow. Something in my brain is really wired wrong. Because the intensity of our arguments about laundry doesn't match what we're arguing about. I'm also not able to hear what my partner, spouse, mom is telling me. I don't have any logic. I'm saying things that I would never say if I wasn't upset. I'm doing things that I would never do if I wasn't upset. And this is why. It's because my prefrontal cortex is not on and my amygdala is driving the bus. What happens in coupleships is there is an unintentional triggering of those core wounds. So for two people that have been living in survival mode, you do not have two fully functioning brains having a conversation about laundry. You have two lizard brains, because it's the oldest part of our brain, or amygdalas trying to solve who's going to do laundry. But the goal of the amygdala is to fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. Well, that won't help us figure out who's doing laundry. The other thing I want to mention, and this is the important part about the prefrontal cortex, is not only is it in charge of analyzing decision making and logic, but when one is in relationship with numbing, medicating, or what our culture calls addiction, the prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain that's affected. Think about that. I know when my dad was in active addiction, he would say and do shit that he would never do when he was sober. He would punch holes in the wall. He would kind of punch me on the top of the head. But when he was sober, I was his baby girl. Those that never showed up unless the numbing and medicating was present. So I want you to think about that. I want you to think about those in your life, and that might include you too, that are participating in numbing and medicating. If you haven't seen that video yet, numbing and medicating can be any behavior that allows me to check out. It can be any substance that allows me to feel different. I'm talking supplements or herbal remedies, all the way up to alcohol, drugs, prescriptions. If it makes me feel different, that's a numbing and medicating agent. Another thing that people forget about as numbing and medicating is codependency and people pleasing. If I'm in a state of people pleasing, my prefrontal cortex is not on because I'm in a state of survival. My brain is telling me I'm not safe and I got to fawn and do whatever it takes to make this person happy so that the conflict goes away and everybody's safe. Even though there may not be a lion there, that's what my brain is telling me. So in active numbing, in active addiction, if you will, I don't like that word, but when we are in a state of actively numbing and medicating our body, the prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain that's not functioning. It's not working. So when you think about things that you do and say in that argument, it's probably not things that you would do and say to anyone else that doesn't create that reaction for you, that doesn't create that amygdala driving the bus. And I just want you to notice what's happening in your body. I want you to notice what this is bringing up for you. The invitation to journal about this and take it to your next session. The invitation to be curious about if you are neurospicy, what did that mean for you that you didn't even have access to this part of your brain until you were 30? Well, what it says to me is no wonder I didn't graduate grad school until I was older. Amanda, is there anything that you'd like to add to this or share?
The other thing that helps me kind of be aware of what's happening when I'm in the moment, because I don't always have Amber's picture to hold around, is you can use your hand to kind of
Mm,
also get a picture of how this happens. So I got my brainstem here, amygdala here, prefrontal cortex here. So I'm just wrapped around. When my prefrontal cortex goes offline, I flip my lid.
mm.
It's like my brain isn't even whole. It's not connecting. There's things that aren't firing because I'm in a different part of my brain. And that's also why some coping strategies work at different times and with different people because I'm in different parts of my brain. And so that's also the purpose for a bottom up or a top down approach, depending on what's happening in your body and where you are with your prefrontal cortex.
Thank you. I love that visual. And what I've been told by clients at the Healing Collective is they will do Amanda's with their own hand. They'll look at it. They'll remember that, not remember everything from the session, but they'll remember that or my mushroom head. And that actually starts to bring the prefrontal cortex back online. Because that's what the next question people ask me is, okay, well, now that I know all this pathology, what's the recovery? What's the solution? Well, the solution is finding your coping tools, as Amanda just said, that helps you come back online. For so many of us, let me speak in the I. For me, I have to have a degree of separation. I have to have a grounding, meaning I remove myself from whatever was triggering me. I get grounded. And in my getting grounded, I usually do breath work. Breath work requires a part of the brain that uses and brings back online the prefrontal cortex. So when you see t-shirts that says just breathe or breath, I love to tell the story that one of my first therapists told me to breathe and count the 10 crocodiles, and I wanted to kind of punch her in the face. What I don't like about that is no one ever explained to me why. The why is because breathing actually brings my brain back on. Oh, well, if somebody would have told me that, I would have done it a lot sooner. So it's not just about the counting the numbers and the breathing, even if you do box breathing, which is what I do. It's about the act of bringing my body, my mind, and my body back together, being grounded and being embodied. So whether you do that with Amanda's example, whether you do that with the mushroom head or with breathing, it is finding your way with your clinical relationship and your therapist of what brings you back on board. And the more we do it, the easier it gets. And I don't want to say quicker, but the quicker. I can come back online a lot faster than when I first started because I could be numbed out for weeks. And now, same day, I can come back online and be okay, which is really important if we're using numbing and medicating agents. It's not a quick fix. And anything that is for me and about me is worth taking time. So remembering that the more you do it, the quicker and the more it helps. It's like a muscle. The more you work it out, the stronger it gets. Anything you want to share, Amanda, before we close?
Oh, that was beautiful. Thank you.
Awesome. All right. Well, there you go. Thanks so much.